Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Welcome back to Business Matters with me, Karl Fitzpatrick. Well, when Dave Murphy joined the Cork-based project management group in 1989, he could never have believed that he would one day be the CEO of that company and that it would employ 3,500 people globally. Now, 34 years later, Dave is set to hand over the reins of a group that has enjoyed immense success in the design and construction of facilities for multinational clients. Dave joins us now to look back at this incredible Irish success story. Dave, I think it's fair to say that you've certainly worked your way up through the ranks of the PM Group.
Good morning, Karl. I guess I did, Karl. Yes, I joined in 1989. I qualified from what was then the Cork Regional Technical College as a chemical engineer in 1985. And then 4 years later, I worked initially in a manufacturing company. And then in 1989, I joined PM Group, which was Project Management Limited at the time, actually, was the name of the company, but later rebranded as PM Group. And I joined as a process design engineer, so started working with a small process team in the Cork office, working on the design of facilities and infrastructure for multinational companies.
Now, the business itself is a global business and employs 3,500 people. But how vital to the growth of the business was the cluster of US multinational companies based in Cork and almost specifically, I suppose, in Ringaskiddy?
It was very critical in terms of our development as a company. Even though the company was founded initially in Dublin, most of the early growth actually came in Cork, Karl, and that was on the back of, exactly as you say, multinational companies like Pfizer and like Penn Chemicals, which later became SmithKline Beecham and GlaxoSmithKline. They were probably two of the early clients that we developed relationships with and started doing work with here in Ireland. And then, gradually more and more pharma investment came to Ireland. There was companies like FMC, which was one of the companies I worked for in the early part of my career, Clearing Plough, which later became part of Merck Sharp and Dome. And then through the 90s, the focus switched a little bit. Dublin saw a lot of investment in companies like IBM, Xerox, Intel, a lot of huge investments in the Dublin region. And then you had Pfizer in Grange Castle, which is an absolutely enormous campus now in the early 2000s. So more balance came into the business then, I guess, between the South and the Leinster region. So they tend to be pretty evenly balanced now in Irish terms.
And in the early days, of course, PM was a small company when it was knocking on the doors of those multinationals in Ringaskiddy. So how easy or difficult at the time was it to get your foot in the door to develop that reputation?
It was difficult for sure, but I guess there wasn't a lot of companies locally at the time, offering or at least trying to offer what we did. When a lot of the multinationals came to Ireland initially, they used international companies to do the design and the project management and the management of construction for them. And that situation probably was the case right up to the late 80s, early 90s. And then a few local players began to get stronger and even collaborated together to form, teams that could do the work here in Ireland. So, if you look at it now, most of the big international FDI work here in Ireland is done by companies based here. Whereas if you went back to the 80s and 90s, it was largely done outside of Ireland, in London or in the US.
Back in the 80s and 90s, did the PM Group back then collaborate with international project management companies?
They did indeed. So I guess when we were trying to scale in the late 1980s, we certainly realized we were at a disadvantage. The company was less than 100 people at the time. So we formed a relationship with a large UK-based international company called Foster Wheeler. So that relationship actually lasted for 25 years, but they became an equity partner. They bought initially 10% and later owned actually 25% of the business right up until 2015 when we bought back the 25% that of the company that they owned.
And then as the IDA started importing US technology companies into Ireland, the project management group at that stage had developed a fantastic reputation in the project management space. So at that point, was it easier then for you to access companies and contracts such as IBM and others?
It was. I mean, I guess we reached a scale of about 1,000 people around, say, the late 90s, 2000. So yeah, if you took it, say, from 1990 to 2000, we actually grew from about 100 people to 1,000 people. So it was a decade of incredible growth and development. But then we were at a scale where we could obviously do the bigger projects. And that was a very important phase in the development. So we were able to do those projects, and then we developed all the full range of skills and disciplines. Initially, we didn't do architecture ourselves. We used to buy that in. We didn't do civil and structural engineering. And gradually, we developed our own capabilities in all of those areas. So we became fully, I suppose, independent and able to do it on our own.
And as well as expanding the range of services that you were providing, you also leveraged the relationships that you had with US multinationals here in Ireland to be able to expand into international markets.
Yeah, it was largely on the back of relationships that we developed here in Ireland that we first began to internationalize. So we basically followed those clients internationally, initially in a small way, and then gradually grew on the back. So we won projects for companies like Pfizer, like GlaxoSmithKline, initially in UK, then later in Europe, then later in Asia, and most recently in the US. Johnson & Johnson, very good example, a company we started working for in Limerick, actually, in what was Visticon, it's now Vision Care. Later started working for them in Cork and in Ringaskiddy, and now we work for them all over the world. Same story with Merck, or Merck Sharp and Dome, as they're known here. Initially worked on the sites in Ireland, and now we work for them in places like China, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Switzerland, and in the United States.
A key development feature of the PM Group also was its employee ownership structure. Not too many have an insight into this, but can you explain how it works?
Yeah, so I guess up until about the year 2000, when some of the early founders were looking to exit the business and think about retirement, the company was quite tightly held, probably less than 20 owners in total, and the bulk of the shareholding held by quite a small group of maybe 5 or 6 people. So they were looking at their options in terms of how they could set the company up for the future. So they after looking at it very carefully and using an outside consultant, they actually set up initially an APSS scheme here in Ireland, which is a revenue-approved employee ownership scheme, and that was set up in about the year 2000. So that facilitated employees in Ireland to become shareholders, and then we used that model to set up scheme. As we internationalize, we follow the principles of that model to enable employee ownership as we internationalize into different countries. So basically the way it works is there's an annual market in the shares. So I guess you always have people retiring and exiting the organization. So they basically sell their shares back to the company. And then staff employees in all locations have the option, and it is an option, to buy those shares, generally using their annual bonus, to buy shares in the annual market and build up a shareholding in the company over the years. So you start small, and then you just keep adding to your portfolio every year, and I guess they benefit then. They build up a share portfolio in the company, and when it comes to retirement, they sell that back into the pool, and it's redistributed again to future employees. So it's a really good scheme. We've got about 1,200 employee owners, and they're all over the world.
It must be a massive advantage when it comes to staff retention as well, Dave.
It has been, particularly for management. We have a scheme for the management, and a lot of the managers are incentivized around the employee ownership. So if the company performs well, everybody does well, all the shareholders do well. So there's a very strong inbuilt motivation to drive the company forwards and to drive growth. But everybody can see everybody. I always say it's quite socialist. When things are good, everybody benefits in the organisation, and when times are tough, everybody pulls together to manage our way through it.
The size that the company is at now, it's as important for you to decide what projects not to take on. So how would you describe that sweet spot project for the PM Group today?
This is probably quite surprising. There isn't that sort of one sweet spot project. What would surprise a lot of people is that about half of our business, everybody identifies us with the big, multinational projects, like the huge projects we've done for people like Johnson & Johnson and Merck Sharp and Dome here in Ireland, which, some of those investments are 300 million, 400 million, 500 million capital investments. But actually half our business is small to medium-sized projects on client sites that are sustaining capital, as they call it, recapitalization. And, some of those projects are very, very small. It could be, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 euros of a capital project that's replacing perhaps a key piece of equipment or a key piece of infrastructure on a site. So about half the business is actually those sustaining capital and small routine day-to-day capital projects. And then the other half is the big projects that can be 50, 100, 200, up to 5, 6, 100 million and more. So there probably is no one sweet spot. Obviously, we always like to have a portfolio of the bigger jobs because, they can be quite beneficial to the organisation, especially if we're managing the whole thing ourselves.
Sustainability is high on the agenda within the overall construction sector, but how have you adapted your own service offering to reflect its importance?
I guess we've always had an environmental practice within the company, a very strong one, in fact, and it was one of the skill sets that we exported initially back in the 1990s. So we've kind of developed and added to that and built up a very strong environmental and sustainability practice, which almost runs as a business within a business now. So we have a very strong skill set in that area that we can use to advise clients in terms of their own sustainability journey. So that's a very big part of the business for us. And then obviously as a company, we're looking at our own carbon footprint, and a lot of that has to do with travel, unsurprisingly, within international companies. So, our own decarbonisation efforts would be around the use of the offices that we inhabit, the construction sites, managing waste.
And Dave, apart from sustainability, what are the other mega trends that you're seeing out there in the construction sector today, even from an international perspective?
Yeah, I guess digital transformation would be the other big one. We're transforming ourselves in terms of how we deliver those capital projects, but all of our clients are on a major, digital transformation journey. So the use of digital, right through the project life cycle, but also, in terms of how those facilities operate, in terms of how they're maintained, in terms of how they run their processes efficiently and sustainably. So probably the two big trends, I guess, is sustainability and everything around the use of sustainable materials, decarbonisation, energy efficiency, and then the other one would be digitalization and digital transformation. They'd be the mega trends.
Now, you'll be retiring from the role of Chief Executive of the PM Group later this year, at a time when the PM Group's underlying sales have increased by 14%. Why do you feel that now is the right time to step away from the group?
Yeah, I think the answer to that's pretty straightforward, Karl. I've been doing this job for over 12 years now as Chief Executive, and I certainly feel, that that's definitely long enough for any leader. And, it is. I think comes a time when it's the right thing for the organisation and the right thing for myself to hand the baton over to somebody else, because, companies do need a fresh voice. They do need to, fresh voices, even in terms of the leadership and new approaches. And, that was planned with the chair of the company 3 years ago. So I've known for quite a while that I'd be stepping away, and we had a very well organised and well planned transition to the new CEO, Anthony O'Rourke, who takes up the reins from me at the end of the year.
And Dave, when you look back at your long career with the company, 34 years, what are you most proud of achieving?
Certainly, I'm very proud of the way the leadership team and the whole team at PM has grown with the organisation. I mean, the thing that brings you into work on a daily basis is the people and the interactions you have with the people in the organisation, which is what has always given me the buzz. It's a very sociable place. I have a lot of really strong and good relationships with a lot of people across the organisation. I enjoyed our company. I hope they enjoy my company, but you'd have to ask them about that. But I'm proud of, I suppose when I interviewed for the job, whatever it was 13 years ago, the one thing I said in the interview was I hope I can take care of the culture and, be a custodian of the unique culture that we had in the organisation. And I hope that I've done a good job of preserving and enhancing that culture over my 12 years.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Dave Murphy, the CEO of the PM Group, and we wish Dave all the best for his retirement.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.